Welcome to what should be a very, very special night for all of us. We know that architecture is the backdrop for our communities. It's the places we live, work, and play. Winston Churchill said that we shape our buildings and thereafter they shape us. But those of us who toil in the service to society to create community know that it's only rarely that we get the opportunity to have three things come together to truly create something special. It takes a community and leadership of the governmental entities that allow us to do the work. It takes a very special client who understands the power of architecture to inspire a community. And most importantly, from our perspective, because we have a bias, you need an architect who really understands the tools, the elements that we can use to create that inspiration. And here in the Humana Building, we had all of those things come together. And while it was born of controversy, some people didn't quite get it at the first instance, we now see a structure that has become a beloved icon, not only of this community, but of this nation. Earlier this year, the American Institute of Architects did a public survey to gauge the public's feeling about various structures around the country. And the Humana Building made it into the top 100 because of its significance, not just for architecture, but for communities. It stirred the people's souls here in Louisville. And so as a result, we've got the opportunity tonight to hear from the people who helped bring it to fruition. The client, the architect, as well as the city. And so with that, I'd like to introduce your mayor, the Honorable Jerry Abramson. Mr. Mayor.
Thanks so much, RK, and it shows what a special evening it is that the national president, the international president of AIA, is with us, has come in from San Francisco for this special event. You know, it was 25 years ago, almost to the day, that two individuals stood on this platform, this stage right here. Two people who truly understood how important it was to set the bar for their hometown at a level where others would have to truly reach and extend their grasp. And say to this community, we have all discussed and we have all looked at all the models and argued around the coffee pots and argued around the water coolers, but the decision has been made. And on this stage, 25 years ago, almost to the day, they then turned, and from behind the screen came the outstanding architect that we're going to get to hear from again today. But it would not have happened without the vision of Wendell Cherry, whose voice you heard a moment ago on the film, and his partner throughout the development of the business and throughout their commitment to this community. His partner, our friend, what I consider to be the #1 corporate citizen in this community today, Mr. David Jones. David?
Is that the shortest speech you ever heard from the mayor? Wow. That's because he knows what a treat you have tonight when you hear from Michael. And I'm tremendously honored that Michael made the journey down here to Louisville today. I had a wonderful visit with him earlier today when we toured the building, and he'd been back to see the building before. He was last here visiting with me about 5 years ago, before his illness actually. But the building is so busy and so used and so adaptable. But we went through the building and saw lots of touches that he had thought of in designing the building, and then for him to see how truly well it operates and how it just gets prettier every year. The natural materials that he chose, I think there are 8 different granites and 8 different marbles in the building, will last literally for thousands of years. And the complexity of putting that building together, you saw some of in the film just now. I shared with him a few of the comments that were made about the building at the time it was built. They've largely been forgotten. One of the architectural sages of the day said those boys are entitled to all the ugliness they can afford. I'm not going to name the person because I'm sure that was just a slip of the tongue. But we have here with us tonight, I think virtually the entire Humana team who worked on this building, except for Bob Harris, whom you saw pictured there, who passed away, but was a wonderful part of the team. But would you all please stand up now? I'm not going to call your names because I might miss somebody, but you're all here, so please stand up. Jim Walters and Doug Heisler and Homer Lamont and David Russell and all you guys. That team did unbelievable work for Humana as we built actually several billions of dollars worth of buildings, not just in the United States, but in other countries. And I wonder if there's anyone in the audience here who worked on the building. If so, would you please stand up as well? I don't know if any. When the building opened, we did something that was traditional at Humana, and we invited everyone who had worked on the building to come to the building with his or her family, because the pride of workmanship that went into that building and into so many buildings that we built is a tribute to the unbelievable capability of the working men and women of our country. And Wendell and I were lucky enough to, at that time, have our offices in the adjoining building that was then called the First National Bank building, and we could look out the window and watch the construction of the Humana building every day that we were in town, and we would always go over there if we were in town at lunchtime and wander around the building and meet the people who were working on the building, and to really to give them thanks and a little bit of recognition, which we tried then to do in a more formal way at the end. There's one story I want to tell you about this. Actually, my family have heard it before, but I told it today to Michael, and he hadn't heard it before. Many of you are my friends from a long, long time, and you will remember that in the early 1980s, there was a lot going on with Humana. On November the 25th, I believe it was, or the 24th, Dr. DeVries placed an artificial heart in Bill Schrader, and Bill Schrader lived with that artificial heart for 610 days. No one has ever lived that long with a heart, but that Jarvik heart has led to all sorts of innovations since that time that have had a remarkable impact on people with heart disease. We had recently, in 1983, taken over the University Hospital, which was bankrupt, turning away indigent patients. The community was in turmoil over that. We actually opened a free clinic down at 9th and Broadway where people could come, and then we took over the University Hospital and brought it out of bankruptcy and caused it to be the first charity hospital in the country ever to be awarded distinction when it was accredited, and it ended up being quite a wonderful hospital. And I was feeling that we were doing some things that were fairly important, but we really didn't get a whole lot of respect for all of that. Then the Humana Building appeared, and the day that it opened, the whole community's view of Humana changed. It was the most remarkable thing to me. It says something about the power of architecture. It also says something about the limitations of people in being able to conceptualize ideas, but however that may be, it totally changed the view of Humana in this community. It became seen as a solid citizen, which I think we were all along, and I think it had a further impact. I don't want to take too much credit because it's not all due to us, but the building, the building of this building and a building of this quality at the location where it was built sparked a lot of interest in Main Street. Tom Nolan, who's in the audience tonight, has pointed out that Louisville has probably the finest Main Street in the United States. And we're a part of that. We're not the cause of it, but we're a part of that. It wasn't entirely accidental. When we commissioned this building, we wrote some thoughts for the architects who were in the competition. And Wendell said that he wanted this to be a building of national significance, which it has turned out to be. I said I want it to be a building that will cause anyone who ever hereafter builds a building in Louisville, gives it careful thought, and doesn't just put up the cheapest building that they can think of. And I believe you can see the results of that. When the Pavilion Tower was built, I think they made a great effort to outdo the Humana Building, and I think they created a truly distinguished building. I won't vote on how it came out, but it's an example of what's happened in Louisville, and so much of the credit for that goes to the wonderful man whom we're going to meet in just a moment. When we looked at the various models, we had 5 models, we had 5 incredible architects. 3 of the buildings were truly exceptional, but ultimately we decided that there was only one building that could be built only in Louisville, that it was truly a Louisville building. We worked for 2 months with the models and with the architects, asking them for additional information. We talked about function, we talked about the things that we didn't understand about the buildings, and the more we talked about them, the more each of us, Wendell and I, made up our individual minds. And finally one day I said, look, it's time, you sit down and write your 5, and I'll sit down and write my 5, and we'll declare like you do in high-low poker. We declared, and guess what? We both chose Michael Graves' building for all the reasons you just saw in that movie. So it's an absolute wonderful honor for me to introduce you to Michael Graves and give you a chance to have a conversation with Michael. Michael?
Awfully nice to come. I thought after the film we should just all pack up and go to dinner, but that's enough. But I want to introduce David Money, who's come with me tonight. David lives here in Kentucky and is the Dean of the School of Architecture at the university, and was a student at Princeton when I was teaching there, and has been here for 13 years, I believe, and has done an enormous amount, not only bringing wonderful faculty to the school and keeping the place very active, but also David has been responsible for a big push in preservation. And so when we look at something like Main Street, I think also of other people who are doing other things in the city, this city, and Lexington and other places in the state. Thank you, David, for that.
Thank you, Michael.
The idea for tonight is that I'm going to show you the pictures that David Wendell saw when we submitted our work to them on boards, and they looked at them over and over again, and then, as they said, they called us and asked for further information. We had no idea. They gave nothing away, whether we were first, second, or fifth, and we had to imagine that we were last. And so we answered in the best ways we could, and truthfully, and so on. But finally, when the call came from Jim Walters, who in a sense made all of this work. He brought the architects and the clients and the city and especially the contractors to the same table and was able to get everybody to agree. He was bigger than we were. And so Jim has been a friend forever because of that. But Jim finally called me, and we had a very small office at the time, and by certain standards we still have a small office, but we were all crowded around the telephone. The phone didn't ring that much in those days. And so when the secretary told me it was Jim Walters calling, and everybody just was quiet, and the rock and roll went down on the music, and Bob Dylan was silent, and all of that. I date myself, but nevertheless, he said, "Well, it's very nice to finally call somebody and give them good news." He didn't say we won. I didn't know whether it was a free trip to Las Vegas or what it was, but he said that he would like for me to come to Louisville, and they were going to present all of the work. I said, okay. And if you can come on a certain date, we'll make the announcement. I thought, well, so we'll have to wait some more. And I didn't know whether he'd called the other second-rate architects and told them that they were too invited to Las Vegas, but I really didn't know. I did have dinner with one of them in London a few years later, and he congratulated me finally. You don't do that. You call him right away. But he called and he told me at dinner, and maybe it was because I was paying for dinner. I don't know really well what it was, but he said, well, you know, we got a very close second. And the way David has just told us the story of listing all the names, I don't know what David's list said, and I don't know what Wendell's said, but I don't know whether they really cared very much about second at that point, because they were happy, they agreed. Anyway, what I thought I would do is talk about the building in a way that, like the Jarvik Heart, is conceptual, but ended up to be this place and thing in Louisville that I, for one, am very, very proud of. And you're all invited to the 50th anniversary. I'll be 97. I figured that out on the way over here. I'm not too quick with math, but anyway, don't subtract 50 years. Anyway, and then once I finish that, which won't take me but a few minutes, then I've asked David to, without any preparation, and he's good at this, I know, but to ask some rather tough questions about the building. I'm sure its place that I think it holds and in history, and what I expected it to do, which I've practiced all those answers, so I know what to say. So it won't come as a surprise if he does say that, and I might even answer them before he asks. So we'll see what that yields. I'm going to have to turn my back to some over here and look here so I can point with this magic pointer, and I hope it shows. It does. Okay. This is I suppose, the way we imagined it, because in a moment you're going to see the model. And the model we painted to appear like this, though we had thought that the whole building would be built of one stone, and you can already see here several, but the one stone was going to be Kasota stone. And I tried to reconstruct on my way to Louisville why it was that we changed, and I think it was decided by Jim Walters. Remember, he was the one that's larger than the rest. And he thought it might be a little porous. And he might have been right because it is a sandstone, but I thought in Louisville it would have been all right, though I much prefer this stone, though it cost a few bucks more. All right, David, go ahead. Now, you all know with the great state of Indiana being here, and Louisville being here to the south. I'm from Indianapolis. And I said to some journalists this afternoon, I hadn't been to Louisville. I had been to Jeffersonville to play football as a high schooler, and we got absolutely creamed, as I remember. So I was anxious to go to Louisville for lots of reasons, because of the closeness and what I'd heard about the city and so on. But here it is on the bend of the Ohio, this particular bend, which is we call the Falls of the Ohio right here. And that's, of course, what slowed down the fur traders and other traders. And so that's why these communities of Louisville and Jeffersonville and so on were founded along the river there, because it was a kind of stopping point. And Main Street, and this is from 1857, it strikes me as interesting that the theater that we're in, not this part of it, but the facade, and I saw this couple trying to get in tonight, and they walked to the facade of the Actors Theater, and it was locked. And I yelled up to them and said, "It's another night." And they, no, I didn't. Anyway, I was sorry it wasn't open, but as I remember, that's the way I came in when I was told about Las Vegas. And so I was curious that I couldn't remember the name of the architect, so I went back to today after our little conversation with the press and Googled it, and found that indeed in not 1857, as this slide is taken, but or this depiction is taken, it was 1837 that the facade of the Actors Theater by James Dakin was built. And though the plaque doesn't say that, it is Dakin, and it's on the cover of his book, his monograph. And it's just the most marvelous building face that you can imagine. I'm sorry that because of the needs of the theater and so on, that little by little it was eroded, but I can imagine his neoclassic way of looking at life in those days was something that would have equaled his facade, because if you have a moment, just go across the street and look at how sublime that face is. Now, these kinds of buildings have a very different order, in that the ground was always used for commerce, shops, stores, restaurants, and so on. And generally, the next floor up was either the dentist's office or the lawyer's office or whatever. I'm happy to see the lawyers have moved back to Main Street, in a restaurant where I had lunch with my clients some 25 years ago. But above that would be housing for people living in the city. And this is generally the way the city was made in the 19th century. And it was fine in the sense that we all participated in the various, not only the activities, but the institutions of the city. And this is really the slide, the picture of Louisville, not the Kentucky Derby and not the bridges so much, but all of this kind of idea of the street and what it meant to this place from the 19th century on. The site was interesting because it had already been, in a sense, eroded. This black building here was enormous. The first time I saw it, and saw that it was a bank and knew that our site was here. It was then a parking lot. I renamed this bank Some people call it the BBB, but the very big black bank, but I always called it the BFB. And David Jones was always too careful. He always called it by its real name. But there's a bank over here, a very little bank, and David's offices are here. I haven't asked him why he's moved over there, but that just means that Humana's doing very well. This was done by the office. I've been told, not about the man himself, Mies van der Rohe, and so that was something to respect as well. And then, of course, the Kentucky Center here with a plaza that you can see cut out of its front face, which is there, and a kind of plaza here for the BFE, which is sort of behind the building, so people have a place to have lunch. And then another terrace there. And when you look down here in this corner, you see the 19th century Main Street and all of those wonderful 4-, 5-, and 6-story buildings coming to the street. Now, suddenly, in our time, the order had changed, and if we could see the other side of this, we would know that those 19th century buildings were the same. And we were asked by the organizers of the competition, all of the architects were, to give back something in the public sphere to the city at large. And I am sure, without asking any of them, they meant something like this. They meant that I would, or we would, give them a place for the city to meet and so on. But I thought, given the city now had 3 erosions of the 19th century face, maybe there was another way to skin the cat. Now this is, I couldn't show one of the other competitors because you would hiss and jeer. So I'm showing you a little piece of Boston by a really terrible architect. And here it is. It's a building that could be put upside down with little else, with no problem whatsoever. As you see, it has A, B, C, B, A. And you have a place to walk through here, and oh, by the way, the front door is there. And then I show it really because right next door is the station of Boston, done by a very good architect. Not because of style, not because it has, I guess, ionic columns, but because it is like the 19th century building that you have here on Main, and it is also a building with certain kind of significance, not just because of its size, but because of the order that you see here and the base that you see there. Now no commerce along here, but people would rush in here to catch their trains and that sort of thing. The ever-present clock would be up there, and it gives itself away as a public institution, the train station. Our idea was not different than this, very much the same as here are the 19th century buildings, and here is our model that was here on this stage 25 years ago in soda stone. And those were the kind of big legs, the kind of legs that you see here, piers that allow the face to be porous for us to walk in here on the sides or in the center there where the center is there, the same kind of order. I've never compared these two before, so it's fun for me just to look at these two together tonight and talk about them. But it was thought, as there is a large porch in here, that we could have an enormous porch. And being from Indianapolis, I remember my parents, when they wanted to meet somebody downtown, they would say, "We'll meet you under the Ayers clock." The Ayers clock is a big clock that would stuck out from the corner of the building. Ayers was a department store in those days. I think it later became a Bloomingdale's or Macy's or Kaput, I'm not sure. But it was a fine store, but it had a little wider sidewalk and it was a place to meet. And I thought about that we could actually make a place where people could, one, get out of the rain, or today, out of the sun, and have a place to meet and have a place to prepare for the day's work as those are going to work in our building, which I said as soon as we finished it and saw this juxtaposition, that the BFB was the box that the Humana Building came in. And it was the idea that as you pass the threshold, now we're not just going into a diner that you might go into on Main or a small office, but into this monumental company that had just developed with Dr. Jarvik the heart and was going to do great things. And as they pass from the street to about this line back here, down at the base of the building, where the entrance would be, they would have a chance to have not just a threshold that was pragmatically engaging the two materials of the material out here on the sidewalk and the stone that we might have in the terrace, but in preparation for the interior and the day's work and so on, a kind of decompression, if you will, next. I did many little drawings like this. They got a bit cartoony. I'm sorry about that, but there's a little plan over here, the way I think. There's the river, and I haven't drawn in the bank over here or the bigger bank there, and the 19th century buildings are drawn there. And then my facade is shown here with an entrance off Main and a second entrance off the side, which you see here. This is Fifth, and it struck us as curious in that we had just finished the Portland building, which is at Fifth and Main in Portland. So I knew we had won. But anyway, that was our front door, and this was our idea of this kind of zone of a plaza, a place to meet under the Ayers clock next. And then the plan, now I've got the plan oriented north. Indiana is up at the top, the river up here, as is our model there. We're looking down on the roof of the model, and we're looking at the extended front door and then the side over here. In the early days of the competition, and there's that side entry, not too dissimilar from that little drawing I had done, we had thought that these would be shops and stores for, or lawyers' offices or whoever could afford to be here under the canopy of the loggia of Fifth. And over here in the corner, we had established a way that this perhaps could even be a restaurant. I thought how nice it would be if we could just join in the institutional interests of the houses and buildings along Main Street and have a restaurant or something public, a small museum or something like that. That didn't quite work out, but it was that initial thought. This is an early plan where one would come in here, meet somebody perhaps, but know to divide left and right and come back to the core of the building, one going to the top and one going to midway through the building for an efficiency that was taking place in most tall buildings at that time. Now, an early drawing here on the left, and there's the early stone, and here are those legs that come to the face of Main Street. Now, for this model picture, we've taken away the Kentucky Center just so that you can see this, but that's the shape of their plaza, which in a way we can borrow, and we did today to have some pictures taken back of the building. But here are those columns that come down to the street, and then the front door, which is here. All of these are front doors, if you will. And then a lower building. This is key to what we tried to do and what we tried to convince David and Wendell, that in choosing us that we were being good to the street and therefore good to Louisville. When you can see these buildings of their, let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stories, and that's just about what the legs are there, you could say that I've got this whole front element here that doesn't come in contact with the height of these. But we thought that the porosity of this lower porch was something that would give us the scalar similarity, and that this would be an interesting bump up in scale from these 19th century pieces to first the upper porch, where there are porches here as well under trellises for the executive offices, which was new. It was thought in those days that all executive offices had to be at the top of buildings like this. But from here to there, finally to our building, and then to the bank across the street. We're going to talk about this big porch up here, so that's really the third from here to here to here, as the building continues to express itself as having this face toward the river and the orientation of that really great south light next. The west side is seen here, and one of the journalists today said he was excited when he would come from the west to Main Street and see the side of the Humana Tower completely lit up in the glow of its stone against the backdrop of the black building here. Now we've painted it all the same kind of terracotta there, but it is black. So you see it the way you would see it in the background of this model. And then one of my drawings over here for the east side of the building next. So here's that juxtaposition. And you see these cornices here jutting out the way they do, even this shorter one having a cornice along here. And we thought we too needed a cornice and someplace where the porches up here could borrow some of the street from the face of the building. And so that's what this tilted face is there. The columns coming up and then simply tilting out to become the cornice. Thank you. Then the building from the corner of 5th and Main, here looking back at that cornice there, the tall front door, all of this being open. I didn't say that before. Those of you who are here and haven't been under the porch know that all of this is open, and the front door we'll see in a moment. And the tower, which had to be very efficient, of course, is seen back here. I think either Wendell or David told me at the time that they wanted to be located here because they took a very short lunch and they wanted to be close to the stair and come down for their exercise, go get lunch. And David had forgotten that he told me that 25 years ago. And today he said they actually rented out 2 floors up here and wanted them to, I think to Bear Stearns or somebody, and wanted them to get good rents. So ever frugal, David was down here. But I think they got the best of the deal as they can look across at the river more or less on its plane, because they can always go to the porch up here that belongs to everybody. Next. There are the Falls of the Ohio, of course, and they look pretty magnificent here. And so we wanted that characteristic, again, to make a Louisville building. For underneath our loggia, we have made the Great Fall here and here, and you actually, not like Moses, but you actually come through those two water bodies at that point, very much like you would here if you were an early settler to Louisville. Next, please. And here is my early drawing. It was really wonderful to get to visit these again. And I had imagined, didn't know that David and Wendell were collectors, but thought that we might have 1% art or something like that, even though this wasn't a city-owned building. But I thought that this waterfall here that was going to be an easy metaphor for everybody, and then the entrance being there through the doors, and here are all these folks meeting like I thought I would with my parents. And then you see, I want to show you, I don't think David's ever heard me say this, but a mistake that I made. And here's the water coming down, and it looks quite lush as it does in the waterfall that you just saw. Go ahead. We're going to see it again in a moment, but I wanted to get around the building, I guess, first. Another thing, we'll leave that comment about the mistake for not another time, but for another minute. But when David and Wendell saw the back of the building, he thought, I think it was Wendell, thought this was a little too Christian-oriented. And quite frankly, I had not seen it. I had seen this stripe of glass, which you see here, come up through the building, and then the same cornice that we had on 5th and Main out here to be established back here, so that up here there would be a porch as well looking back to the city and where they get the good light. What I did, at this point I had made a kind of bay window, and so we restudied that and did a lot of new drawings, but this was the end of it all. But I made a new tower actually within the body and the backdrop of the more organized windows there. I made these very big windows where each floor can have a sunroom. So all these people working in this floor could come to their sunroom, and today we saw that one floor even got their mail there. There was a small kitchen. You could put your lunch in the fridge at that point and come back out here and eat in the really good light. That's the south light. You can see the shadow here coming down. Another thing that happened just while I'm here, and show you how tenacious Jim and Wendell and David were, is we were having a problem with the stone as it was being laid, or at least I saw it as a minor problem. When stone arrives, and this stone came from the cutter in Carrara to the site, it has variations, and that's what we wanted. We didn't want wallpaper. We wanted stone that looked like stone, acted like stone, and therefore we loved the variation, but we knew that there were a good number of lighter stones and a good number of darker stones. And rather than have a kind of checkerboard back here, or something that the mason wouldn't be responsible for, what we decided to do, or had decided in the contract, and they knew this, that all of the darker stones would be on the south side, and all the lighter stones would be on the north side, so that when the light would hit it, it would turn that stone to be the shade of the stone that is on the north and east and west. And as we walked around the building, and that wasn't happening, and I came out very infrequently for problems. I came out to look at the building, and to see that everything was right, but generally because of Jim and others and the contractors themselves, the thing went so beautifully. Well, you saw the film. It was a wonderful experience. But we walked around, and as I remember, Wendell and Jim and I went to a table with masons and so on in their office over here, and we talked about what the contract had said and how they were laying it up, and was that right, and no, it wasn't right, and were they going to do anything about it? And they said something like, well, you see, sir, it will cause a problem with the schedule if we really insist on keeping the checkerboarding down and put the light stones on one side and the dark stones on the other side. And I had never seen Wendell like this, but he just looked at him and said, that's your problem. And he said, Jim, it's going to be done, right? And Jim said, yes, sir. And it was done. So, And they met the schedule, so I was happy about that. Next, please. Or else I wouldn't have had a story to tell you. But here's the south side there, and there are the little chairs that for your lunch. If you stay in the building, it's pouring down rain or anything like that, and you want to stay in the building. But I have to tell you, Main Street today is not what it was 25 years ago, and there are lots more choices. There's a walk, and there's a Mexican restaurant, and there are a couple of really good restaurants and so on. So there are a lot of choices now that didn't exist then. And I knew that, and so I thought people might be bringing their lunch. Go ahead. This is a picture that a lot of you don't know, but it is 19th century Louisville again, and there's the Ohio, and there's Indiana huffing and puffing with Toyota plants. And here's this family up here on the water tower. And I thought how wonderful this was. And so, if you won't give my secret away, that's where that porch came from. The water tower has long since departed the scene, but nevertheless, I thought how great it would be if we could put it back next. So here it is, and here's the porch, and there it is in plan, and this is kind of reception room, which I understand a lot of people have, or several people have used for weddings. Even the mayor, thank you very much, has gotten married here. I guess it was up here, and David said his daughter got married there with a tent up here, which must have been very festive. But again, I was told that there was not a parade, because that's on another street, but there was fireworks that took place before the Kentucky Derby, and the place is absolutely packed with people and looking out to the Ohio. And so I thought how great to look out at the Belvedere from here and to have all the folks in town who could get a pass to go to the top of the building, see it from that point. Next. So here is that porch. And I told David today that at about the same time we got this commission, I got a call from Christie's auction house in New York. They had bought a building and wanted to renovate it, and they wanted a new auction floor, a new auction room. And I said, well, what does it have to contain? What's the criteria and so on? And they talked a little bit about it, and they said, but that's not really it. We want you to make the best room in New York. And I thought, what a wonderful thing to do. And we were working on this porch at the time, so I was determined to make the best porch, not in Louisville, but the best porch. And we didn't get the Christie's job, but we did get this one. Next, please. The bridge is seen here, and it is, at that time, a masterful piece. Cincinnati has a couple of these, and these are like the Queen of Cincinnati, where I went to school, and then the bridge itself. And I couldn't help but understand that that was a major part of this city and the connection back to the land on the other side of the river, not just Indiana, but the whole idea of the North. And here, another bridge down there. Go ahead, David. So here is that structure underneath, and that is the metaphor of the bridge supporting that big porch, which is here. The porch itself is an arch. It would normally be in this plane, but it is lying down, and then with the steel underneath it, there are actually wings that come out from there to out to the ends, and it probably only holds up this little piece up here. But if we were standing down here, that would be like one of those cornices falling in New York. I would be scared to be under it, so I'm much more sanguine about having this piece underneath it. Next, please. And the lobby is seen here going inside. It was exciting yesterday when we arrived to see it. And then to look back at my drawing, which wasn't far off from this, but it was an interesting reminder. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that they would have this great Greek sculpture to put in the rotunda back here, where you separate to the two elevator banks. But they did, and it surprised me with that next. And here is that rotunda and how my clients participated. I mean, who could ask for more? And there is back out to that lobby where we were just seeing it next. And then in the elevator lobby, these light fixtures, and those light fixtures over the elevator, and then a larger version up on the porch, we made for a company in Brooklyn. Well, they made them for us, actually. They now supply them to all architects as it's in their catalog. But we designed them for the Humana Building. And so that was something we got to do here. Depending on the size of a building, if you can tell the manufacturer or show the manufacturer that you're going to buy a gazillion of these things, they will make them for you. So we could have had any pattern for any rug. We could do a lot of things here because of the size of the building next. And then up at that reception room, here you see it with modern sculpture there. And that is not there now, but it's open and a quite pleasant room. And then that opens out to the porch on one side, back to the elevators on the other, and then onto the auditorium on the far side next. Up on the executive floor, there are pieces of furniture by Joseph Hoffman, one of Wendell's favorites, a table there, and quite by accident tonight, another table by Joseph Hoffman, and then Moore's seated man there. So this is what you come into, not Florence Knoll furniture, but Joseph Hoffman furniture, and it prepares you for their own offices and the differences for each of the executives, which was fascinating to us next. Well, I did get back to the waterfall, but when you walk by the building, you'll see that the waterfall doesn't look that lush, and it's not because it's not on fully. It's because the stone behind it is light colored, and it should be black or dark red or dark blue or whatever, but it should be dark, and it's just the opposite of what you think. So I don't make that mistake again, but you'll now see it and kind of smile when you see that. Well, this young fellow here, dashing, between Wendell and David, we're doing essentially what we're doing now, and we were welcoming people at the opening of the building. And this didn't, I'm juxtaposing two events, but you won't tell. This then carried over to a wonderful black tie dinner that I believe that night or the night before, where the following happened. The thing is, I have to tell you that on Madison Avenue in New York, there's a modern gallery, and I was at the Whitney Museum, and I went across the street to the modern gallery, and I saw this Joseph Hoffman compote, and I just knew that they'd forget my buying it. There was no chance, and so I thought this is perfect for Wendell. So I called Wendell and I said, Wendell, there's this compote, and I'll describe it to you. You'll know the one, and it's probably the most voluptuous of all of Joseph Hoffman's pieces like that, vessels. And I said, it's for sale, and there are very few of them. In fact, I've never seen one for sale or auction. And I said, it's for sale now. And he said, Michael, I'm really busy. I'm working here, you know. I'm trying to pay for your building. And okay. I felt like Jim and I did that day when it was about the stone. So I said, all right, and go back to work. And I forgot about it. But I happened to be in New York about a week later, and the compote was gone. And I said, well, he's lost his chance. I told him, and I was sort of thinking that I should have put it on hold until he got a chance to come to New York. But in the black tie dinner, they were thanking everybody, and by the time they got to me, they had I had given my little talk, and I was walking back to my seat, and Wendell turned around and he saw this box sitting there, and he said, "Oh, come back, come back." And I did, and he said, "I forgot to give you this. Oh, this is our thanks for the building." And of course, it was, as you see, let's move it on. You don't really have to say anything more about David Wendell when you hear a story like that, because the whole process was just like that.
Welcome back to Louisville.
Thank you. Thank you.
As you tell this story, and after watching the film, what strikes me, I hadn't quite put it all together before, is the degree to which a whole series of unusual things came together with this commission. First, a competition, which doesn't happen very often in this country, but it's a way to try and get talent out. Some exceptional clients, and we both know, you can have good clients and sometimes not, but these were exceptional clients,
Right.
all resulting in an exceptional building.
Mhm.
Were you aware at the time of how extraordinary these circumstances were?
Well, when somebody said, I think the mayor said, that the building opened its doors to some controversy, I'm always surprised to hear that when I come to Louisville, not because it wasn't, but because I knew controversy, and that wasn't controversy. I had just come from Portland, where the Republican newspaper and the Democratic mayor were at odds with each other. It was the Democratic mayor's term when I was chosen, therefore it was his fault that I was chosen. And it's not that we didn't suffer. We did suffer too much. We didn't, but we got the building built, but barely. And in the Whitney, we didn't get the building built because there are a couple of very well-known architects who did what architects should never do, but they did, and both of them have won the gold medal. But they are New York architects, and they did it, and that is to criticize another architect's work before the building is built. You just don't do that. It's unethical. It's not written, it's unwritten, but you don't do that. So I know that some of you are dying to ask me about a new building that's about to go up here, and I'm not going to talk about it. But in the case of the Whitney, it became modern legend. We hear your building didn't get passed by the city. It did get passed, but they couldn't raise money for it because people wouldn't give to something they thought was that controversial. And then they hired another architect who designed a building for $400 million. And that one didn't get built either. And now they've hired a third architect, and they've just canceled his project. So maybe it wasn't me, but maybe it was the board or whomever. But that was real controversy. That was hard, and it was hard on my practice. But this was lovely, just lovely.
And it came at an interesting time in your practice. You know, I arrived as a student at Princeton, and you were working on houses, and by the time I left, you were working on big buildings. What was that transition like, and what role did this building play in that process?
David is kind. He's alluding to my nickname in those days, which was called the Cubist Kitchen King. And we had a small practice. Karen Nichols, who's with me, one of my partners, and I were discussing how many people were in the office. I don't think we had more than 15 or 20, but it was a small practice, and we have more today, and we could do big buildings today. But it was an exciting moment. I had every confidence in the world because we had been through Portland, and Portland was hard. We were the only ones in Portland to make a building that they could afford. And the other two architects, I had breakfast with one of them the day after we presented to the city. And I said, Aldo, you're X millions of dollars over the budget. And you were told not to even arrive here and present if you were not on budget. He said, in his wonderful Italian accent, I didn't tell you his last name today, he said, if they want my building, they will have it, if they want it badly enough. But we were on budget, and another architect said he was on budget, but if you read the fine print of his document, which we were required to submit, you could see that we required pieces of his building from our brief had been left out for add alternatives, and we hadn't done that. And so we were heavily criticized for making a building first out of stucco and then out of concrete. We couldn't afford this. It just wasn't in the cards. We couldn't afford real stuff. And the mayor came to me and he said, my whole tenure here is on the line here. Unless you can pull this off, I'm going to go down at the next vote. So I had him on my shoulders, but I can tell you it wasn't, I'm sorry for this, it wasn't for the mayor that we got that building built. We wanted to get it built. And a friend of mine, a good friend, Peter Eisenman, had told me long ago when we were racing for an airplane, he yelled as I was behind him, I didn't know how he was running faster than I was, but he said, be resourceful. And so I always have been. And we found ways to do it, but I knew that we could, it wasn't a matter of pulling it off, just do it as it was supposed to be done. Our associated architects were great, and we were there, and we had a great relationship with our structural engineer, and so many of the drawings were done by him. We didn't get in trouble, as I remember. Maybe Jim has a better memory than I do in terms of getting the drawings out. But one of the great things about it was we didn't have a lot of other stuff to do. So we just put our heads down and did it. Some of the star architects today, you read about them doing this building in Paris and that building in Singapore and that building somewhere else, and you wonder how they have time. I don't think they can possibly give it the kind of time that great works really need.
Well, you'll remember my roommate, Max, at the time, was working with you on the Portland building, and I remember him going back to work on a Friday night, late at night, and the office lights above a Chinese restaurant, I think, on Witherspoon Street.
Yes.
They were just always on, right?
They were
Always
on.
on.
But why not you?
I wanted to ask you about that B+ I got in my seminar I took with you.
Yeah, well,
So,
it was a gift.
fortunately not the only one. And I could describe another, and in fact leads into a question I want to ask you about color
Yeah.
in this building. It was the night before Thanksgiving, and I was in your studio, and you had made a job presentation in school, and you had made a job presentation during the day. The other faculty member was there, and people had sort of drifted away through the afternoon. I'd gone home and had dinner, and came back to work by myself. I was in the studio, it was about 6:30, night before Thanksgiving, and you walked in, and I was the only one there. And it was 6:30, night before Thanksgiving, you go home. But you came over and you sat with me, and for an hour and a half, you talked to me about color. Well, this was 1979. We weren't thinking about color. We were thinking about white architecture at that point, but you were thinking about color. Tell us what you were thinking about.
For some of the laymen in the audience, let me just try to clarify white architecture. I had a client, a house client, who wanted a modern house. And I asked them beyond the bedrooms and so on, what constituted a modern house to them. And they said, a white house. And my 11-year-old daughter at the time said of my house, which was terracotta in color, and said, Daddy, I can't bring anybody here. And I said, Sarah, why? And she said, it doesn't look like a house. Well, it really doesn't. It's an old Italian-built warehouse, and it looks like an Italian Tuscan barn. I think it looks glorious. And I said, well, what does a house look like, Sarah? And this is a sophisticated kid. She said, white. So we had come out of a time when white architecture meant a kind of revival of 1920s and 30s architecture, especially under the tutelage of somebody like Le Corbusier and the international style. And Richard Meyer, many of you know Richard's work. Richard still works in that manner, has always, and is in a sense just has picked up where Le Corbusier left off before the war. Then Le Corbusier started to change after the Second World War and do some different things. But in the so-called White House, that one's in Fort Wayne, Indiana, not my house, the other one, I had a full wall that I decided that I would paint a mural on. The wall was so empty when it was white because I had a neighbor's house to look at from, if I'd opened a window there, it just didn't seem the right thing to do. And there was a wonderful view out the other side, which was more open, more glass and more transparent. And so I painted this mural, which would be a focus of the living room on one side, and then the view focus on the other major side. But that too was a trick of, not a trick, but something that Le Corbusier would do. And it was kind of true to my upbringing in graduate school to do that sort of thing. But I was really the only one of my group or my age, I suppose, that would have painted a mural in their own buildings. In fact, I painted 8 of them in another building in Indiana, in Fort Wayne, and I even did it for some other architect friends of mine. But therefore, color, painting, art, sculpture, always were very important to me. It wasn't that I wanted to do it all. It's simply that oh, thank you. That means we've talked too long.
We're just getting started. Thanks, Steve.
Oh. Cheers.
Cheers.
But I had been to Rome for 2 years after graduate school. I had won something called the Prix de Rome. And I went to Rome, and I would sit at a dinner table every night with 30 or so scholars. And they were art historians, classical scholars, anthropologists, and people who were really looking at the works of art in 1st, 2nd, and 3rd century Rome, at looking at the Renaissance, and would come to dinner with what their PhDs were about. Some of them were postdocs, so they would be talking about what their book was about, and so on. And I would hear them discuss works of art in a way as we architects could never talk about architecture. And I thought, what a pity. It wasn't that they just intellectualized it. Art historians are different than architects in that art historians are really about history. They're about the history of the work. This is making it too silly, but who was Pope at the time? Who were the benefactors? What were the movements? What was the church within which this work was found to be about? What guild was it from? Was it the Lawyers' Guild? What was the Doctors' Guild? And so on. And where were the influences? All of those things are as important, if not more important, to an art historian than the quality of the painting. we as architects tend to try to talk about what is the quality of something, and not simply say I like it or I don't like it. But I had not been trained in graduate school. I had happened to go to graduate school at a very, very bad time, in that it was very anti and ahistorical, intellectual. It was sort of kick the tires kind of time in schools of architecture. So I was determined when I started teaching in Princeton, along with some of my colleagues, Peter Eisenman, Colin Rowe, and some other people, to try to write that balance. And David didn't know it at the time, but probably why I was there on that particular evening was I had probably just come from the library, where I was reading, because my own library wasn't very good at that time, reading and finding out how I could sit at a table like that and talk about the metaphors of a building, the myths, the rituals, so on, the Levi-Strauss of architecture, if you will. And I wanted to be able to do that with any adjective that architecture has, and color is certainly one of them. If you see a terracotta building in Italy, it's because the ground is that color. It is not loam and a clay like we have here in the Midwest. It's very red, and they make stone out of it. They compact it, and they make what we make concrete blocks out of. They make terracotta blocks, and when they lay it up on whether it's a farm building or a palace, they might remember that relationship to the ground. And that ground relationship then gives over to inhabitation up above that, where above the service floor, the ground level, now not the shops and stores so much, in a palace at least, but the rustication of the ground level might be rough, might be terracotta, might be other kinds of stone just taken out of the earth. And then above that, where the family lives, and then above that, where the family sleeps, you'll see the coloration become more ephemeral. And so the roof inside, if you looked up at a mural on the ceiling in the Farnese Palace, let's say, or take one of the best, then you would see blues and azure blues and light colors, cool colors, because we've gone from something heavy and reinforced at the base and substantial to something ephemeral and godlike at the roof. So I needed to know all that. And so to be able to talk to you, I'm sure I said the same thing to you on that eve of Thanksgiving back when.
It was the greatest day of my professional architecture education. I could say that now and say it publicly. It was an amazing moment with an amazing teacher, and I'm eternally grateful for it. You also talked about nature that night and the role nature had in determining color. And it strikes me that nature has always been a part of your architecture. You think about the Humana Building, and the building itself is a wonderful work of architecture. The emphasis on urbanism was something new and unusual, the kind of rediscovery of American urbanism in the street at a point where it desperately needed that. But nature was there too. It was the river and I think more. Could you talk a little bit about the role of nature in making architecture?
That's so thoughtful of you. Thank you. Hand was coming off. David really means nature in quotes, and in the sense that we look at magazines and so on of our colleagues, and you'll read in Architectural Digest, a kind of lighter fare, where somebody will say, you know, I'm an actor in Hollywood and I live in the Hollywood Hills, and the nature is so beautiful here. I wanted to bring the outside in. And as if nature can suddenly walk in and invade your room. And I really must thank my mother for doing this. She was a kind of an acerbic woman, but she said once when I asked her why we didn't have any plants in our living room, she said, I refuse to be like Life magazine where they say, bring the outside in, you should buy a ficus tree. And she said, you know, let the poor ficus tree live outside where the sun shines and get water, because I'll kill it, and so on. And it was a telling story, but that's on the lighter side. But if you think about nature, well, probably the course that David took from me, a lecture course, I talked a little bit about, and you have to make up stories too, because you speculate as architects. How did we come up with the first table? Why this rug here? Why is it here instead of there? Why is this table this height and that one that height? That's easy. But in the 19th century in Germany, they only had tables of this height. Why was that? If you know, life becomes, in terms of your visual acuity and your visual interest, becomes more interesting. Just like I don't know music, and if I did, I'm sure my life would be much richer. Don't start, there just isn't time. Anyway, I was giving a course where I had to imagine early things. I was reading about myth and ritual in those days, and I wanted to know if you left the outside and went to the inside, out and in, here and there, hot and cold, whatever it was, what were those differences, and how had the culture structured those differences? And if you think about outside, you think about either the city, or if you think of it in pure sense, we're the only ones here, you think about it as very raw nature. Well, there was a time, not so many centuries ago, when nature and the woods were thought to be mean and nasty places. Nature was not good. It's good now, because we have so little of it, but nature then was where you could get hurt, killed, or whatever. And they had to structure a kind of sense of differences between the forest and that we cultivated, our farm. And let this rug be that we have cultivated for just a moment. And the black stuff around it be the woods, the forest. And coming into this, well, where do we come in? Do we just come willy-nilly through the woods? How did we do that the first time? Well, there probably wasn't the first time, but maybe there was. We're not talking about creationism here. We're talking about this woods and the farm that we knew in Greensburg. And so I had to imagine what that moment was like for myself, because nobody was telling me. And so I found this wonderful slide of a farm in Ireland with the woods all around it and this rectangle plowed out, and there was the plow doing its work. It was a picture taken from an airplane. And so I showed that probably to David and his classmates. And we talked about that not only the first plowing of the field, but what happens then. So you plant the kumquats, then what happens? They come up, and then what? You automatically eat them? I think probably not. You probably have to think, where did these come from? How was that magic done? Would they come up stronger and hardier if I watered them more? What's going on here? And once they're in your hand, let's say it's a beet or it's something, and there is this marvel. And this isn't a ficus tree brought in by Life magazine, but here is this piece of nature, and you say, I've got to thank somebody. Now this is complete invention. But if you also think of this rug as a plot of turf or ground, or the nave of a church or a synagogue, then you finally think, well, this table is a bit like, well, these are not props for me, folks, but I'm just using them, but this is an altar, suddenly. And now I can put this bead or kumquat on the altar, and I can go away, and I can let the gods know that I treasure what has happened. This has gotten very syrupy, but nevertheless, I imagine that that kind of nature and that kind of mythic beginning would serve me very well in a place like the riverfront Louisville, but didn't know it then because we were doing small projects. But from the design, the height, the material, all of the kind of thing that we think of when we think of whether altar or floor or pavement or this rug, we're always thinking about those. We're thinking about differences. One of the reasons that the Beaux-Arts was done in by the modernists was not just because of new technologies, but was, I think, because they were stressing in a new democratic world at the time. The political world of that time was starting to see what this country and other democracies could do and how strong we were getting. And the Beaux-Arts was built partially on hierarchies. But these were formal hierarchies of architecture. These weren't societal hierarchies, but they were taken that way by the modernists at the time to help do in that code of performance in architecture. And that might be a bit of a reach, but it seems that, you know, if you have a front door, we know what the front door is for. But if I say I have a side door on Fifth and not Main, we don't think about the servants coming in to the side door or the back door. But that's the story that was propagated at the time of the Beaux-Arts undoing. And so that kind of hierarchy of the society and culture was brought about to help the death blow of Beaux-Arts. But the Beaux-Arts architects, and we look at them today because the way they made plans were so extraordinary. That's another heavy dose of his education, I know, because in those days one didn't graduate from Princeton unless you could make an extraordinary plan. Today, it doesn't matter, and I'm sorry about that. We haven't talked about that at all yet. But today, with the computer and other ways of drawing and describing artwork, so far I've been neutral, we don't seem to need or want to have that discipline of making a plan. Something that would start to talk about differences of here and there and hot and cold, and whether you're pragmatic or symbolic, all of that is, I think, still necessary.
Let's look at our altar for a minute and your building as well. And one of the things I think that's very clear in how you talk about this and in the building that you made is how these are attempts to really elevate the everyday life, that we all can engage in something higher and think something more than we may be used to thinking about. You know, I grew up with great urban aspirations in the 20th century about utopian ideals. We can look at all of the great kind of urban plans about making things better that never came to much. But it seems to me that lately design has reached a point where it is elevating people's everyday lives, and a lot of it has come through some of the little things that you've made. I tell my faculty, you know, design's taking over the world with toasters now. It's not about big urban plans, but it's about all of these wonderful little objects. And could you talk about that scale of the product as opposed to the building, or as a complement to the building?
I would love to. What David said was very important, in that he and I, student and faculty, thought very strongly. I think because of our age at the time, without a doubt, not only were we going to change the world and make it a more, not urban place in the sense of density, but urban place in terms of bringing back the institutions on Main Street and other main streets in the country, and making more buildings like the Humana Building, not in style, but in its place in the city, and that we would stop making glass boxes that would sit in the middle of a plaza and waste all of this. And everybody said at the time, the architects and the developers and everybody said, oh, this is good because it's more light and air and ventilation for all of those working in the tower. But it is a smaller footprint, and therefore a cheaper building. And therefore it is a way to really cut the cost of a building rather than saying, here is the site, let's make a courtyard building of 6 stories and turn this guy on its side, and therefore have a place where we can recreate, we can bring the family, where we can have lunch, where we can do things unlike this tower to nowhere. So that's what we tried to do here on the street and bring that sense back. In a way, that only happened for a while. It happened in some significant buildings besides Louisville, but today we are clearly back to this. And so the fight is, we started over again. Anyway, and David has that every day at school, I know, because I have one slide after all of this, in case he says, where are we going? I'll have to show how I personally have failed in that the Humana Building and other buildings that I've done, and my colleagues who think like I do urbanistically, have not won the day, but that stupid little laptop has won the day. Anyway, I think the only way to do it is to do something with Apple. But join them. But I'm one of the few, Karen Nichols, and one of my partners here is another. We don't use the computer to draw, we draw by hand. And it is a different culture. It's not wrong or right that we do it our way and they do it their way, but I sit in a smaller, we have 4 houses that we work in, 3 houses in an office building, really. And mine is the smallest because it has an elevator and a ramp for me. And it just happened after my paralysis 5 years ago that they found this wonderful place for me, but it just happened to be away from the architect, so I miss them, and I'm going to get a wheelchair that climbs stairs, and then they'll see. But anyway, I work with a lot of product designers, and they're marvelous people, and they use the computer in a way that is just amazing. But I can make a drawing in my sketchbook, which I do, hand it to them. They then don't even draw it by hand their own way. They put it right into the machine, and this, I don't know, ice cream scoop starts doing this. And they see it from every vantage point. And then they test the materials, and then they make models, they make physical models. They've made 2-dimensional models, which are very compelling, but then they make 3-dimensional models in a model shop, which you can hold and really tell whether ergonomically they are good for me and also good for the pocketbook and also good for somebody with arthritis. And you have to, we have many audiences. And so now we are, instead of working just for Target and Alessi and other people like that, from the highest to the lowest level in those kinds of objects, we're also working for a company that makes medical equipment, equipment like this wheelchair, not this one, walkers and canes and bath rails, and a lot of what we think of as very boring and ugly things. But when I was first sick, I was in a hospital for therapy, and at that time I had a loaner wheelchair, and I'd gotten into my wheelchair in the morning and gone into the bathroom to shave, and this was the first day in this hospital, and I had been told by the surgeon the day before that he was very proud of his hospital because it was done by experts. That means experts in knowing how people like me and others like me need something different than people who are a bit more mobile. So I rolled into the bathroom, and there was my altar, which was the sink. I reached for it, and I couldn't get the faucet at all. I wasn't even close. And so I turned around, and it's called range of motion. And I reached my arm back in some pain, I must say. And I couldn't reach it. And so I thought, well, it's lucky I brought my electric razor. And so then I looked up at the mirror and I saw the baldness of my head only. And so here was this little crown just peeking over like shmoo, you know. And so I thought, oh my, the experts are at work. And at just that time, the surgeon, Dr. K, walked in, and I said, I know that you are planning an addition to the hospital. I wasn't really angling to do the addition, but I did think I could get the sink and the mirror right. And so he said, yes, we're very excited. $40 million. I said, oh, that's wonderful. I said, are the same architects, the same experts going to do it? Yes. I said, out there in the hall, doctor, there's another loaner wheelchair. I saw it last night. Could you get in it and come into the room? What for? I'm very busy. I said, I am too. Please, you don't have to check me today. Just get the wheelchair. And he did. And by the time I rolled into the hall, and I said, okay. He said, oh, all right, what for? And I said, shave. And he couldn't reach, and he couldn't see himself. And I said, be careful of experts. And so we want to own this category. We want to make things for people that, I have to tell you, we won't take it beyond the Actors Theater, but it's very easy to make things look good. It's very difficult to make them both work good and look good. And work good, look good, and cost very little. So that's what Target has taught us. All the work that we do in Asia and Europe with things being made is our administration has shopped everything somewhere else. And sorry for that, I couldn't help. But we've learned to deal with folks that do things for menial salaries, and it's a crime. But if we compete, if we want to compete, at this point we have to do that. We only hope that those workers unionize and ultimately get paid an honest wage, but they don't now. But they make our things, and they make them for very little money. And then you see them at Target, and you know that if it's $5.95, it probably costs about 30 cents to make, you know. And but with all the advertising in the stores and to pay everybody, finally they make a small profit, not a big profit, but they make a small profit. And the more they make, and the more we make for them, the happier I am. But the more we make durable medical goods, even the happier I am. The same company that I told the story earlier, but same company, we had the first meeting with them, and they're called Drive Medical, and they had asked us to do half a dozen things, thinking that we wouldn't get it. And we had not only made models and drawings, and they were ready to be made in Asia. We had priced them out with our Asian people, and so we knew everybody could afford them. And he had also asked us to do some graphic work for their packaging, which we did. And when he came, he and the president and his associates, they were very, very, I've never had a client like this. They're happy with everything. Don't change anything. Do it. This is great. We love it. The packaging is perfect. I don't want to change anything. I thought, wow, that's great. And then I said the magic words. I said, do you want us to do some more? And he said, why, yes, that's the idea. And with that, he said, see, this is our catalog. It was literally 3.5 inches thick. And I said, wow, that's all your stuff. And he said, yes. And I said, well, hierarchically, is there something we should start with? And shoved over the whole catalog, and he said, "Have at it." And that was just a great day, but this is now 4.5 years later. Very little has come to the marketplace because they've used us as a lost leader. And I thought I'd learned that lesson long ago with a furniture company I worked with, but I haven't. So we're looking for ways to light a fire underneath them.
I think we're using our audience.
Even though we're at time, I have one last question I want to ask you, and it goes back to the education that I had, and we were serious about education, and architects were serious with each other, but somehow they were so serious they didn't know how to talk to the people. And what has always struck me about your architecture is it's fun for people. How conscious were you, and when were you conscious of making something that people could just take delight in?
I'm asked that question by a variety of different kinds of people. I like your work, Mr. Graves, because it's so amusing. Really? It makes me smile. There are other ones that do the same job, but yours is, it's very happy to have it in the kitchen. It's on, you know, the word kitsch comes from kitchen, so don't go there. But anyway, I listen to that, and it isn't because when I started drawing, and my parents saw me drawing, and what I was drawing was Mickey and Donald, and my mother said, unless you're as good as Picasso, you're going to starve. You better find an occupation that uses drawing, but is a dull drawing. And she told me what architects did, and she told me what engineers did. I said, I'm not going to be an engineer. And she said, okay, well, I didn't tell you what architects do. And I said, you don't have to, I'm not going to be an engineer. And I only had 2 choices, so luckily it worked out. But it isn't because of that. But, you know, again, it has to do with something else that we discussed in those days, and that is the question of character. Now, there's character to the big black bank I showed you. There's a character to the Humana Building. There's a character to the facade of this building that we're in. And if we were to write a novel or a short paper on each one of those, we could, given and say that's the main protagonist in our story. It's not about whether you like it or not, but you talk about the qualities, good and bad, of all of those things. So character has always been interesting to me in terms of showing differences. And if I'm making a table, I'm not making an altar. But there is that altar thought in the back of my mind, nevertheless. If I'm making a table to eat on, this height, I'm not making one to have coffee on, unless I'm from Bavaria in the 19th century. And therefore, if I'm making an ice cream scoop, I'm not making, you know, a votive candle. There's difference. And so I let those things happen, and I don't go after them. But if I'm making a candelabra for the altar of a church, it may be abstract, like Le Corbusier did. It may be rather traditional, like Schinkel might do. It might be something that I have no idea what I would do, but something that you might say that looks like you, Michael. But it probably wouldn't have the element of levity that maybe other people see in other things. It would probably be dead serious. And that's the way I treat the things that I do, so that there is joy in those things that need it. And if I'm designing a tomb, and I've been asked to do one, he hasn't croaked yet, but I have. And he's somebody you all know. And so I don't know how to treat that one. But he swore me to secrecy. He had a heart attack, so he called me the next day and he said, "You got to do this for me now, it's in my will." But I wondered what I would do, and then I look at ones that you and I know from the history of architecture, and there are many that are just glorious. But for this guy, I could put a smile on somebody's face.
Right. Michael, it's been a wonderful hour and a half. I can only say how lucky I was to have 3 years of this, not just an hour and a half. Thank you so very much.